Well, today I have the privilege of speaking with Simon Freakley. Simon's the executive chairman of AlixPartners, ALIX. It's a consulting firm that has its roots in restructurings and helping companies through very difficult times. And Simon is only someone I've gotten to know in the last couple of years, but I really enjoy any conversation I've had with him. We also worked together most recently on the John Jay College of Criminal Justice Foundation Board, where I've enjoyed getting to spend more time with Simon. But where do you hear this conversation? He's so smart about a lot of things, and he's been advising people like me who've tried to run a business on things about crisis and complexity and change for a good number of years. But I so enjoy my conversation with Simon today and how he thinks about the world, change, and he talks a lot about fusion, where it's not just AI, but it's AI and robotics, and his thoughts on leadership. I just find it to be terribly refreshing, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. And just enjoy Simon Freakley. You've been for decades now helping companies and leaders navigate crisis, complexity, and change. You've done restructurings, you've led companies, you've changed companies from within, and most recently at AlixPartners, you stepped down as the CEO to serve as the chair, and we'll get into the whys of that. But we seem to be, Simon, at the very early stages of the most dramatic transformational moment of my life, and that is the whole embrace and adoption of AI and AI technologies throughout our lives. And Simon, you've been early to that game. Clearly, the early beneficiaries of this momentous transformation have been the consulting companies, of which you led one of the prominent ones. And it's been very good for the business of the consultants because we are all struggling to find out, how do we make sense of this? How do we employ these technologies to improve our efficiencies? Yes. But how do we use them to increase our capabilities, on the other hand, which is even more exciting? So as a leader there and someone who's been guiding companies like ours on how to deal with these changes and these complexities, where do you think we are in the adoption of these new technologies? Are we very, very early? Is it clear to you where things are going? What do you think of where we are with regard to AI today?
Well, first of all, Jim, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate being asked and delighted to join you in conversation. Obviously, AI is an extraordinary opportunity, but also an extraordinary disruption. So flip sides of the same coin. But just to put that into context, if you think about your and my working lifetime, we've been the extraordinary beneficiaries, really, of conducting the majority of our careers during this amazing super cycle of growth in the world economy, particularly, of course, in the West, but just generally. The last 30 or 40 years have just been an extraordinary time of the world being increasingly flat, barriers to the movement of goods and services, and capital getting lower and lower. And of course, the amazing post-war regeneration of the world economy. We then hit in 2020 this extraordinary event, COVID, which completely took us all by surprise. And of course, everybody had to pivot on the back of that. We just about recovered from the extraordinary disruption of COVID to then have this new technology arrive as if from nowhere, ChatGPT, generative AI. And I would say it's a little bit like, an asteroid. We look up into the sky and all of a sudden we see this planet killer bearing down on us. Oh my God, ChatGPT. But of course, ChatGPT is just really, as in terms of generative AI, the most recent manifestation of what we used to call machine learning. And machine learning has been around for over 30 years. So actually, this asteroid's been traveling at us for decades. And it's just that we've all looked up and seen it.
It's getting a little bigger and a little brighter every minute.
Exactly. And so contextually, I think we've had this extraordinary disruption with COVID. We're now stepping into an extraordinary disruption and opportunity with AI. And I'll get to your AI, specifically your AI question in a moment. But my general point is that we are now living through the most unusual and disruptive period of our lives. and that we got sort of seduced into this flat world on the back of a growth super cycle. But now there are massive disruptions at work, and these disruptions are layering on top of each other. So it's not just dealing with one disruption at a time, whether it's geopolitical and the conflicts that are going on, or the climate disruption that's going on with global warming, which of course we're right in the middle of here at a 105-degree day in New York, or whether it's generative AI. These disruptions are laying on top of each other, turning a rolling sea into a choppy sea. And so in that choppy sea, what do we all make of that as business leaders, as human beings, as part of our communities? And so with AI and generative AI, it is a defining moment. Now, whether in due course, Jim, it'll turn out to be more of a defining moment than, for instance, when the printing press was invented and the Luddites took offense and started to smash them up, or whether it's more of a defining moment than the internet and the revolution to our lives that created, I think we won't know for a while yet. But what we do know is that these new capacities, this acceleration to understanding and acceleration to execution in so many ways, are transforming really every business in every industry and every geography. And what we're all trying to work out is how to capitalize on the opportunity of it, how to defend against the threat of it. So for every business, these new capabilities mean that competitors, even newcomers to markets, pose an even greater threat, but also for established players, how we can capitalize, for instance, on the rich data that we have in our businesses to then use these tools for competitive advantage. So in short, Jim, I think it's too early to say whether it's going to be as big a disruption as people are predicting. It's certainly going to have a very significant impact on our lives in every way. I happen to think there's more opportunity in it than threat.
There's a couple of flashing yellow lights that I see on our dashboard here that particularly in the last couple of weeks I've seen, and I'm confused, Simon, by the data we see in the jobs market here in the U.S. It seems to be quite strong and robust. An article I saw as recently as this morning was about 500,000 factory jobs not being filled because they're not available or willing labor to do those jobs. On the other hand, you hear things like Wall Street Journal reporting last week that all 500 of the Fortune 500 companies are projecting that they will have headcount declines in the months and years ahead. You have people who I respect, like Peter Diamandis, on his program Moonshot, predicting that white-collar jobs will essentially be eliminated by 2030. You have calls for entry-level positions being eliminated in nearer term than 2030. And anecdotally, I visited our friend Jeff Sonnenfeld up at Yale back in April and had lunch with his assistant teachers, as I do each year. Last year when I visited, all of them had jobs. Many of them were going into your world, McKinsey, BCG, AlixPartners. But this year, only 25% of them said that they already had jobs, and a few of them spoke about the fact that they've had offers rescinded. So I see those yellow lights, white-collar jobs being threatened, accounting world being threatened. I see entry-level jobs being more challenged. Yet on the other hand, you see all these factory jobs being unfilled, and the anecdotal evidence of things not being as good as they were a year ago. What do you think happens in the near term in the jobs market?
I mean, there's a lot of big themes in there. So just a couple of thoughts. One is, I think any sense that somehow, let's talk about America specifically, any sense that the US is all of a sudden going to reignite all of these manufacturing jobs as a result of government policy or tariff policy or whatever is utterly fanciful. Because number one, the cost of labor internationally, and certainly in Southeast Asia, but also some other places, is radically lower. Secondly, many of the routine blue-collar jobs that have been offshored to these international territories are jobs that the US workforce chose not to do. The thought of bringing these relatively low-paid, repetitive jobs back to the US and somehow make it up Detroit great again is just a fantasy, and it's not possible, and certainly not deliverable.
But if you were advising government leaders, political leaders, and you have, I'm guessing that you would say, with that as a fact basis, what categories should they be focused on reshoring because of its special nature of the work or because of its critical need in infrastructure or defense? Should they be focused on certain categories that are more likely to have success rerouting here in the U.S.?
There's a lot of talk, of course, about AI and generative AI, but the most interesting discussion, I think, happens at the intersection of AI and robotics. And so it's the synthesis of AI and robotics that's going to disrupt not all jobs, but many jobs. And so the ability to use data on the one hand and to use robotics on the other to create efficiency and lower cost manufacturing is significant. And so if you look at, for instance, the auto industry, a very proud industry for the US, and how increasingly cars are computers with wheels on rather than cars with computers in them, a lot of the evolution of transport is, of course, leaning towards technology. So the supply chain, of course, for the automotive manufacturers is extraordinarily complicated, which is why tariffs are such an amazing threat, significant threat to the auto industry, which has somehow now been stabilized. But you say, well, what about all of the very basic blue-collar jobs that now government policy is trying to encourage to come back on shore? Well, actually, I think the question is, what are the skills, what is the upskilling, the desirable upskilling for not just young people coming out of school, but also people mid-career to make them relevant in a workplace over the next however many years. And so my advice to government would be, and indeed has been, to refocus on the reskilling priority rather than trying to onshore jobs back into the US, many of which people simply don't want to do. And therefore, even delivering on that promise is impractical. And so, if you think about AI for a moment, let's keep AI and robotics separate for a moment. Think about AI and the prediction this is going to displace every white-collar job in the next 5 years. The question isn't what is AI going to replace, it's how, and I think Microsoft, it was genius of them to name their AI engine Copilot. How will AI become a Copilot in so many of our jobs? How will AI and robotics become a Copilot to somebody on an automotive production line? BMW did some research about 5 years ago to understand how, if they synthesized human capital with robotic capability, what that would do to the efficiency of a production line. They showed that the efficiency improved by 160%. And so, Jim, I think that the conversation should, the better way of asking ourselves this question is not, is AI going to replace human beings? Is robotics going to replace human beings? But how is the fusion of human capital, robotic capability, and artificial intelligence going to drive productivity? Now, for corporate leaders like you and I, that's quite an important question because, as we know, all of our investors worship at the altar of growth. Every CEO serves at the altar of growth. And so whatever is going on, whatever disruptions are happening in the world, business leaders are still under pressure from their investors, their stakeholders, to grow. And so these things are ultimately about productivity gains. They're about how to drive revenues, not to diminish the societal question that you raise as to what happens to people whose jobs are getting disintermediated or in some cases replaced. Well, the way I think about that is, if you think before the internet, nobody had heard of the web, let alone the job of being a web developer. There are millions of web developers in the world today who didn't have that job before. And what happens? People grow into those roles or get repurposed into those roles.
But there is that period of disruption from a macro point of view, the buggy whip manufacturers found something different to do. Influencers were born, web developers, SEO experts, all of that happened. But there was that choppy waters in between where individuals got disrupted. I think the question for us that I'm asked all the time, I'm certain you are, is what do I advise my 20-year-old daughter, my 20-year-old son? How do they get ready for this disruption?
Yeah, and it truly is a dislocation because, and it's a generational dislocation. But I see it as being only a dislocation. I don't see it being a permanent disenfranchisement, if you like, of the workforce. And so, I remember, when my eldest went to school, one of the options she was offered at school, which I thought was great, was computer programming. And you think, well, actually, in terms of a language, maybe computer programming as a language is just as important as Spanish or Chinese. But actually, as it turns out with generative AI, computer programming is going to be less and less done by human beings. And so there we are. And so I think that we're in this sort of iteration of skill sets. When IBM some years ago did their own study based on, of course, having well over 100,000 employees, they'd worked out that the half-life of a skill set was 5 years. That study was done about 7 years ago. I bet if that study was done again today, the half-life would be nearer 3 or 4 years. And so it's not just that somebody who's been doing computer programming or somebody who's been doing a blue-collar job that might be disintermediated by AI and robotics have to make a change. All of us have to make a change because the skill sets that got us into our positions are not going to be sufficient for us to carry on doing either the jobs we're doing or the jobs we go on to do. So all of us, I think, are under have a priority to make sure that we're upskilling ourselves, including, of course, with AI. So I think this is a dislocation, Jim, but I don't think it is an ultimate disintermediation of a human being in the workforce. And in the same way that we have millions of web developer jobs today that we couldn't have imagined 30 years ago, there's going to be millions of jobs tomorrow that today we can't quite imagine. But it will require, during this dislocation, an upskilling of the workforce to make sure their skill sets remain relevant. So when I say that I think there's more opportunity in this than challenge, I think there's opportunity for productivity for businesses, which means growth for businesses, which means growth for economies, which means wealth for citizens. And I think properly applied, properly supported by government policy, that this could be an extraordinary accelerant for economies rather than just a profound dislocation. But what I'm finding, just to make it practical for a moment, because of course in my work, not only do I have my own leadership responsibilities at AlixPartners, but I get the privilege of a front row seat sitting with our clients as they work through their version of these questions. What I'm finding is that actually the key is to make sure that we're always solving business problems. We're not solving technology problems. What do I mean by that? I see a lot of people spending a lot of money on AI, hundreds of millions of dollars, in some cases billions of dollars. And the ones who are getting the best traction from that investment are the people that are saying, what are the business challenges or what are the business opportunities that we're trying to lean into? And how do we use these new technologies to help us do that? Rather than how do we write the best large language model or how do we have the best technical capabilities? The ones that are defining and solving business problems supported by technology, rather than those people who are defining digital or technology problems as they try and make their businesses relevant, are the ones who are winning the race at the moment. And a lot of money is going to be wasted in this. A lot of people are trying to build the large language models, which will become commodities fairly quickly. The real value is who holds the data. If, take your business, for instance, with extraordinary rich data in terms of, the buying preferences of customers around the country and the world, your ability to use that data with technology tools puts you in an extraordinary position of advantage against those people that only have access to the tools but don't have access to the data. And so solving business problems remains the key differentiator in terms of those businesses that will capitalize on this opportunity.
It would seem to me that in the role of AlixPartners working with clients like us is to counsel us as the user not to just find a way to use AI to do what we do today better, quicker, more efficiently, but to rethink the process at the same time.
Yes, all of the above, I think. So there are efficiency plays, and the efficiency plays, I think, generally, Jim, are now quite well understood. What people took a little while to work out, even the technology companies took a while to work out, was how to use these tools to drive growth. So some of the earliest ways that people managed to think about using the tools to drive revenue growth was on pricing. So dynamic pricing using AI tools became much more sophisticated than some of the older, more manual ways of setting these systems up. So the efficiency plays, I think, is a well-proven case. How to drive revenue growth using these tools, I think, is better understood. But it's both. You want to contain costs, drive revenues, using the tools and the data you have at your disposal to do it.
The example from IBM is jaw-dropping, frankly. I have a friend who's just joined the board of Flowers. His name is Shelley Palmer, and Shelley's one of the smartest guys I know about technology, particularly AI now. And he made a comment to us recently that what he's observed is that people who develop, and I hear so much of what you're saying falling back on individual responsibilities, but I think I see both corporate and individual. And he said, from an individual point of view, well, actually before Shelley was Seth Godin, who said, if you're in your job and you're not thinking about how can I use these new tools to do what I do more efficiently, freeing me up to do the things that only I can do, be assured your boss is thinking about those things. And I thought that was such a good comment and advice-laden comment to make. And then Shelley's comments have been where he's seen people surrender and completely embrace enthusiastically the development of your own toolkit in terms of AI. He sees those individuals feel like they have a superpower. And they're a lot less concerned about will they be disrupted because they now feel like they have the tools to be productive. Even if they're disrupted out of a job, they know they're very employable, or they can hang out their own shingle, or they can work with consulting firms to help other people learn their skills to change how they do business. And that's been in my head ever since, so much so that I have a son that works at the Flowers companies, and I suggested to him maybe a year ago, to leave brand management where he was and develop his AI skills and work on the internal transformation team here, which he did. And I'm very pleased that, I was one of the voices in his ear suggesting he do that, because here he was, in the 40s now, and good at what he did, but he realized the world is changing, had to change his own toolkit. And for us as an employer, and with your input, frankly, Simon, and your team members at Alix, what we've done is, and through our Fresh University, which is our internal training and education programs, said to everyone, we can't guarantee you that your job is safe. We cannot. But what we can do is evidence our concern for you by investing all we can in your personal and business and technology development. So here are the tools, here are the classes, here are the workshops. Take advantage of them. So if that's our commitment, that we can't tell you that everything's fine, let's hold hands and skip in the park together, you might get disrupted, but we are going to invest in you so that you can handle that disruption in the best possible way.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important point, Jim, because it's not that this responsibility is the government's or the employers or the individuals, it's everybody's responsibility. So fantastic that your company is providing these opportunities for people to learn and grow, and hopefully there will be government funding to encourage people to drive these programs. But ultimately, without the individual taking responsibility for their own upskilling, so they don't find themselves in 5 years' time with only half the relevant skills that they need, it's not going to work. So you're so right. It's a partnership between the individual, enlightened employers like you, and ultimately government, but everyone has to play their part. And this dislocation, as people upskill and rotate and adapt, is going to be what means that careers survive, that companies survive, that ultimately economies survive. So interesting, Jim. We talked a few minutes ago about our great friend Jules Kroll chairing the John Jay board, and Jules, of course, not just invented a company, he invented an industry.
He sure did. He invented a verb.
I mean, exactly. And some years ago, when I had the privilege of working closely with Jules, he was chairman, I was chief executive of Kroll. We convened a management meeting of our senior leaders, and Kroll in those days was split into different disciplines, and so you had, former special forces soldiers that were very good at making sure that executives travel safely in challenging parts of the world. There were former federal prosecutors, there were former military intelligence people, there were former law enforcement people, there were former forensic accountants, an amazing assembly of specialist skills. And so we held this conference, and we got this business school professor from Harvard to come and spend a couple of days with us. And we just ran some business case studies for the entire top 100 people in the firm. And just for a bit of fun, we'd have them in their disciplines competing on these case studies. And we ran, I think, 3 different case studies. And in each of the 3 scenarios, and they were pitted, each team was pitted against each other and had to get to the right answer first. In each of the 3 case studies, the former special forces soldiers won. So they won in a business case study against people with profound business experience or intelligence backgrounds or data science backgrounds. The special forces soldiers won. The Harvard professor had these guys on stage and said, just out of interest, amazing that, you nailed all these 3 case studies and got to the finish line before anybody else. What is it, do you think, in your makeup or your training that enabled you to do that? And the former colonel in the special forces team said, look, when in our whole basic training and our whole development of our specialist skills, the one survival skill is to, and he said, in our former world, of course, it really was a survival skill, was to digest new facts immediately. And so as new information becomes available, you instantly pivot to adjust your strategy to incorporate that new information or that new development or that new fact. He said, because what happens most of the time is that people still somewhat operate on an old fact set and they don't adjust to the new information quickly enough. And he said, in our old world, if you didn't adapt to new information quickly enough, you may not survive. And so that just became an instinct for special forces soldiers. And of course, as the case studies were run by the Harvard professor, it was all about revealing more information as the case study developed. And their survival strategy, tactic, competence of digesting instantly new information and new fact was the thing that they said enabled them to get to the finish line before everybody else. And I've often thought to myself, Jim, that's such a proxy for business life that sometimes what we do is we've run a business for a number of years, certain things have worked well for us, we fall back on the experience and the pattern recognition of that. But actually, if we don't pivot quickly to your AI example, then all of a sudden we find that we're not winning the race. So I think pivoting and being agile and digesting those new skills as well as that new data is fundamentally a coping skill that all of us in leadership need to get better at.
We know what we know, or we think we know what we know, and I don't want to be disrupted from that path. So it's a natural instinct, and it's interesting that the special forces guys are trained to do the opposite of that for real survival purposes and makes them more well-equipped to deal with business change because it's constant. Toward that, Simon, who do you see industry-wise, company-wise, individual-wise, who are being bold enough here and saying, I want to leapfrog? I think back to the 1990s, not far from your birthplace, just across the sea. Ireland had a horrible telephony system. And they leapfrogged the world by putting in then the Series 7 switches, and their whole telephony infrastructure leapfrogged the world. And they became a real data center, a service center, because they had this new telephony, because they did it all at once, and so they had the state-of-the-art, so they leapfrogged. Is there anyone who's on your radar screen who seems to be leapfrogging the competition by early and bold adoption of these new technologies?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting what Meta have just done, for instance, with Scale AI. They've just spent whatever it is, just short of $15 billion for a 49% stake in what, we'd all thought was a startup. And Alex Wang, this, now multi-billionaire, less than 30 years old, had a critical skill set and a critical group of people that Meta have no inside information, by the way, so this is only what I've read. Meta decided that they could, depending on how you characterize it, either catch up or leapfrog their competitors by paying a premium to bring this skill set in-house. I think that's a pretty bold move. And, there was talk, of course, by Sam Altman of Meta trying to give $100 million bonuses, sign-on bonuses to critical AI leaders within his business as a way of trying to get an inch ahead. So, I just mentioned that as being, it's amazing that people have the financial capacity to make those types of bets.
It really is, but Zuckerberg has not been shy about making big bets, even some that seem to be wrong, but he's been rewarded for that boldness.
Right. And of course, having now, just joined two things together in my head, the special forces sort of saying in the UK, the SAS is who dares wins. And I think that that's just as relevant in business as anywhere else. So he does dare, and he has on occasions, of course, won. So but I just mentioned that as the Scale AI acquisition as an example of it. I think when IBM did their Red Hat acquisition and then carved out all of their business services business into a new co called Kyndryl, and 90,000 people, taken to one side, set up as a new entity, run by a terrific leader, by the way, called Martin Schroeter. But when they bought Red Hat, that was more than just a creative acquisition. That was a redefinition of IBM's strategy, which, of course, has turned out rather well. And I think, if you look at Larry Culp, who I think is, in my mind, one of the best CEOs, certainly of an industrial company in the US, I would say of any category in the US, his inheriting this behemoth, which increasingly didn't make sense, and then in a very deliberate and surgical way, carving it out into three separate businesses. And now, of course, Vernova, one business, is performing terrifically well. The business he's stayed on as CEO of the aeronautics business doing terrifically well. I think having the vision to do that and the commitment to execution to disaggregate them and set them up, and they're using AI and generative AI in all of those three spin-off businesses to great effect. So I think that Larry is a great example of how to do that. You look at the shareholder value that he's created on the back of it. So I think there are multiple examples, Jim, of boldness, and I think that Larry's boldness was breaking GE up into three businesses. IBM's boldness is using an acquisition to redefine a strategy. And so I think that boldness is necessary, particularly in a profoundly disrupted time like we're in today. And just as another reference point, 10 years ago, the average tenure of a CEO in the S&P 500 was about 10 years. Now it's somewhere between 6 and 7 years. And you say, well, why is that? Well, because the role of being a business leader, the role of being a chief executive is absolutely exhausting. And that, not just the wear and tear of running an enterprise on a daily basis, but trying to stay a step ahead of these developments, making sure your own skill set is fit for purpose as you do it. And so I think that the pressure on business leaders as they manage through these periods of profound disruption and dislocation and try and keep their businesses on the leading edge is really profound. And so, as we think about, what business leadership requires over a period of time, it's a relay race that one person, maybe Jamie Dimon can live forever, but, in most cases, it's a relay race where we have to hand off to the next athlete to take the business on the next leg of the journey.
Tell me, healthcare is something that we're all concerned about. And just this week, I heard that about a third of all physicians are now using a common AI diagnostic tool because they've all migrated to it because it seems to be the best and the easiest to use. It seems to me healthcare is in the way of major advances. I had the opportunity to speak with the head of Medtronic's operating room technologies, and he's a wonderful guy, and explaining to us at a Worth Media Group conference on Living Well up in Boston a month ago, the changes he sees coming in the operating theater were just profound. And him saying the idea of opening someone up to do surgery is going to be seen as barbaric in just a few years. There are so many other ways to treat people and to do surgery that are less invasive. And one little thing he pointed out to me, Simon, that just was a duh kind of moment for me was the size of the incision. Well, the size of the incision is proportionate to the size of the doctor's hand because he or she has to put his hand in there. And he said that whole idea seems barbaric now. And so what do you see happening in healthcare? I see a lot of good things coming, diagnostics, personalized drugs, different delivery modalities, different surgical techniques.
Yes, I think all of those things represent an extraordinary opportunity. I just done my annual executive medical at the Mayo Clinic, and had the opportunity to chat about a few of these things with some of the practitioners. Of course, I got the privilege of spending time with there when I was there for 2 days. They, for instance, at the Mayo Clinic, which I'm sure, by the way, and they're not the only hospital to do this, their scanning of the area to be operated on is now so sophisticated that while the surgeon is operating, normally laparoscopically, because as you say, these big incisions are increasingly not necessary, on the computer screen in the operating theatre, and somebody showed me a version of this, they can take the organ or the part that's being operated on and rotate it, up, down, side, left and right, so they can see exactly what they're operating on in real time. And they can take it right down to the cellular level if they need to for very precise surgery. So whether it's how surgery is assisted by AI and robotics, or whether the intersection of AI, exactly the intersection of the two, or in defining a prescription to deal on a more personal and individualized basis with a treatment regime. And so, as I think to myself, not luckily that I needed surgery, but if I needed surgery, I'd much rather have an experienced surgeon with the AI and the robotics helping her or him do it, rather than without this synthesis of capabilities and skills. So I think that the healthcare example is a wonderfully rich example of how outcomes could be so much better as a result of all of this. The investment, of course, required is enormous. How data privacy is maintained as people use these very, very rich databases to inform the AI, of course, is a challenge, but very manageable. But, one of the things that the chief executive of Mayo showed me, which I was just gobsmacked, they now have AI versions of their doctors. And so if I want to sort of dial up and have a conversation about something or other, I can get the AI version of a senior doctor and have a conversation with them. And as he showed me the demonstration, the recording of the human being and the AI version of that doctor were indistinguishable, utterly indistinguishable, and I could have an interactive conversation with the avatar of the surgeon. So I think the opportunity, so what does that mean? It makes it much more accessible, of course, because you could have an unlimited number of conversations with the avatar. And so I think that the opportunity in healthcare is absolutely enormous, both for efficiency, but also in terms of effectiveness, because of course those are the two things that we're trying to judge by. And I think that, as you say, we'll look back even in our lifetimes in 10 or 20 years' time and think, oh my goodness, did they really do that? Did they really do that type of surgery? It seems, be medieval. But I'm enthused, as you can tell by the energy in my voice. I'm enthused by the opportunity of all of that.
And how might education change? I heard someone in a discussion recently, Simon, talking about an AI tutor for a child, and how she was explaining to me that it would actually be better than a human tutor because the AI tutor can be sensing when the student is distracted or not into it or bewildered or moving astray, and change the program on the fly to re-engage that person and really be assessing and testing all the time to make sure that the student is getting it, learning it, and absorbing it.
I think an enormous advantage, Jim. Again, I mean, I started my family very late, so my kids are still quite young, and both of them have learning differences. They both got ADHD. One of them has, dyscalculia, and as I watch them with their tutors, and their tutors are great. There's something about being with somebody, in person that I think is very important. But once again, the synthesis of capabilities, as I see them using online tools while they're sitting with my kids going through the tutor, the effectiveness of the combination is really impressive. And so I think increasingly it won't be, will all of our kids then have online tutors rather than, human beings, or will they sit in virtual classrooms rather than physical classrooms? I think it's the synthesis of the two where the opportunity is so important. Just a little example, one of the non-profits that I was involved in for quite some time is called NABU, N-A-B-U, and it's an education charity which is focused on early years literacy. And what the founder, Taniela Allison, realized was that for many young kids in underdeveloped countries, there weren't early years books, literature, which they could use to sort of get their literacy on a journey. Because there were books available in other languages, but not in some of the lesser spoken languages and the less privileged areas. And so what she set up was basically a technology where, animators could animate stories with local teachers or community leaders that had the local stories adjusted to the culture, and then compile these things online and then print them locally. So all of a sudden there was early years literature in the local language that was made possible by online tools and printed on a printer, or just read off a device, because 3 billion smartphones or tablets in the world. And it has completely revolutionized child literacy in those places where they simply didn't have the tools to do it. So an example, I think, as to how technology can play a real part. But once again, it's the fusion of human capital and technology.
It seems to be a recurring theme, fusion.
A fusion of those things. I do think that I think what we're going through is what I guess Klaus Schwab would call the fourth industrial revolution. But there is a revolution going on, but I see that as being largely a good thing, with just an eye on the dislocation that you'd mentioned earlier, that what we don't want to have is a dispossessed generation. But if you think, this is maybe a bit of an odd parallel, but if you think about what happened after the Second World War, when everybody came back from overseas postings or military service, and then all of a sudden had to learn a set of skills so they could be relevant in a post-war job market. I think it's akin to that. We're going to have to take responsibility at every age of stage of engaging in the skills that are going to be relevant in the next stage of our lives and our careers.
So for students of history, what actions that took place then, 1945 to say 52, 3, 4, by institutions, governments? I think there were pay programs to help veterans survive while they were finding their way into new world, new work regimens. So what lessons should we take from history that we should be advocating for today? Well,
I obviously I wasn't born in this country, but I understand there were programs to finance people through college when they came back from military service that have the GI Bill. My father-in-law benefited from that and went from being a Marine to, leading a large law firm, all because he had the opportunity through the GI Bill to train as a lawyer and come through. And so I think it's those types of programs where, and it's back to this shared responsibility. It's not just about government, but government making programs available, companies playing their part as you do in your company to provide the framework for learning, and the individuals taking responsibility for engaging in all of that and developing a relevant skill set. But specific government programs like the GI Bill, I think, will be an important part of it.
Today, you're one of the most knowledgeable people in the world about the consulting world, leading as chair, Alex, and so for a decade as CEO. How does Alex retool itself, AlixPartners? How do they retool themselves? And have you been doing that to take advantage of these changes to help your clients to navigate? Are there industries that you focus on? Others you say we just don't have the bandwidth? These are the things we're going to be concerned about and training ourselves on, and others we're not. How do you make those tough allocation decisions?
Well, as you know, Jim, the differentiation of AlixPartners is that our specialism is really leaning into supporting our clients through transformations, particularly if that transformation has to be done on a schedule. So we're very much an execution-led consulting experience. I mean, there are other firms, famous firms, that are well known and respected for developing long-term, multi-year strategies. Of course, we do some strategy work, but our own muscles are really around getting difficult things done on a schedule. And so AI for us and generative AI and these new emerging capabilities are really about how we use them to get speed to insight and then speed to action. So let me give you an example. When I first started doing this type of work for distressed companies, one of the first things you had to do was a 16-week rolling cash flow, because you always wanted to make sure that corporations had enough liquidity, both in terms of cash and borrowing capability, to be able to execute whatever they needed to execute. And these 13-week rolling cash flow were extraordinarily demanding manual exercises because they were done on 21-column paper with pencils and calculators. Then, of course, Microsoft Excel came along and that speeded it up. And so it turned what was probably an 8-week exercise into a 4-week exercise. Well, now, of course, with AI and generative AI, we can do rolling 16-week cash flow forecasts for the most complicated of businesses in a matter of days rather than weeks or months. And so that's an acceleration to insight. And then, of course, these tools also allow you to run many simulations, digital simulations, to work out the optimum path at a given point in time and pivot. And so that gives us opportunity to have speed to impact. So it's accelerated the insight and it's accelerated the strategy, the timetable to execution. And so for us, what it's done is it is supercharged our core capability, which is getting difficult things done. And so today, Jim, we did some analysis just the other day. Over 60% of the work that we do globally for our clients involves at least one AI or generative AI tool. And many of them employ many of them. And so it's just become an incredibly important co-pilot for us in the execution of our work. We have a partnership, as do many others, with Microsoft, also with Palantir. Microsoft gave us a room full of their best and brightest, and we put a room full of our best and brightest together, and they spent weeks together developing AlixPartners versions of the core co-pilot capabilities, so they're surgical instruments rather than blunt instruments. And we use them every day. I was on an AI engine just before joining you in conversation this morning. It's just become an indispensable aid in terms of how we get insight and drive to action. So I think if anything, like in so many ways, AI and generative AI it'll adjust how the consulting industry does its work, but it doesn't take away from the essential value that's created by having people who are very experienced in doing certain things work alongside clients to make difficult things happen.
Sounds to me like fusion once again.
There we go.
And what's next for you, Simon? Now that your chair changes the changes the pieces on your board there? How are you thinking about allocating your time and resources?
Well, as you say, I've just come out of 10 years, almost 10 years, 9.5 years of being CEO, and I've loved it, Jim, as you know. I mean, I've loved the role. I love the firm. But I do think that leadership is a relay race. I do think that organizations benefit from different chapters of leadership. I've had all my best ideas. And I think that new ideas do infuse businesses with new perspectives and continued ambition. The board asked me to stay on as executive chair, which I've committed to do. And I'm still enjoying doing that role. It's a little odd sometimes, when something happens, I think, gosh, I didn't know about that, because I'm so used to having my fingers on all the critical pulses. But my job now is to obviously support the co-CEOs, I appointed co-CEOs, as they settle into the roles. But I must admit, there's a lot to be liked about it. I enjoy being able to bring the benefit of my own experience to the context of discussions, and the CEOs will make their decisions as to how they want to drive the business forward. But it does require, as I sit in the passenger seat rather than the driver's seat, I do have to resist the impulse to grab the wheel now. So far, I've managed to resist the impulse.
For a future discussion, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the changing thoughts and attitudes about retirement. I'm told by my friends in the UK that for a long time, the UK CEOs would leave too early and would have too much energy and too much gas in the tank to be properly retired. And so they've done a lot of rethinking around that. But I think just in general, I'd love at some later point to get your thoughts on the changing thoughts and attitudes about retirement, especially as I get older and older and see people my age and older who are fully engaged in different kinds of activities and making good use of their energy and the things they've learned over the years to make a difference in different venues.
Well, it's back to fusion, I think, Jim. I think the fusion of a chair's perspective and experience with the new energy and different perspectives of new leadership is the combination of that, I think, that ensures that the enterprise continues on the right trajectory. I think the jeopardy that I've seen is where there's a dislocation because there's an exit of somebody that really understood the business quite well. The optimism of new leadership come in and something gets lost in the handover. So I think that managed transitions, respecting that there are different roles that have to be played and people have to stay in their lanes. But I think those managed transitions are critical.
I think when you write your next book called Fusion, you'll touch on that quite a bit. And I look forward to seeing you with grace and style and thought continue to redefine the roles of exec chairs and now your new experiment with co-CEOs. I think we'll all be watching you and your successes and experiences there for guidance and lessons to be learned. And I look forward to chatting with you again because you bring so much to so many topics.
Well, thank you, Jim. I've so enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Well, in the conversation with our friend Simon Freakley today, I learned a lot. I hope you did too. A couple of things that just stand out in my mind are the IBM study done about 7 years ago, which projected then that the half-life of a CEO or any professional, frankly, was about 5 years. Simon thinks that if he would do it again today, it's probably 3.5 years. That was startling. Another point he made that I think is ringing in my head and I will surely borrow from liberally is the idea that leadership isn't a race of an individual, it's a relay race. So you're always preparing to hand off to the next baton holder, the next leader in that same seat. That's a profound thought, like so many. And finally, his thoughtful outlook on technologies not as a standalone, but working in conjunction with another capability or another technology. He used the term fusion quite a bit, and I think it really rings true whether you're looking at how AI interacts with robotics or how human beings interact with AI. There's always a point of fusion. We talked about healthcare, we talked about education, and when you think about the role of an individual teacher or tutor using AI tools to get the best of both possible worlds, I think Simon's a really important person, someone I've learned from a great deal in the last couple of years, and I'm so happy to have had the opportunity to share his thoughts and wisdom with you today.